On October 2, 1552, the city of Kazan, the capital of the last remnant of the mighty Mongol Empire, was engulfed in flames along the Volga River and was collapsing. Beyond its walls, 10,000 Tatar horsemen fought to their last breath, while 150,000 Russian soldiers forced their way through breaches created by an unprecedented weapon. All of this unfolded under the gaze of 22-year-old Ivan IV, who history would later deem the Terrible. Yet this isn't merely a tale of battle. It's an account of how an emerging state finally stepped out from the dominion of the Mongol Empire after 300 years of subjugation, taking its initial strides toward becoming the largest nation on Earth. How did a youthful czar manage to overcome a power that had ruled Rus for 3 centuries? And how did this singular decision reshape the course of history? Understanding the significance of the Kazan battle necessitates reverting to the 10th century. In 1237, when Batu Khan's Mongol cavalry swept through the steppes like a tempest, they didn't just conquer Rus, they utterly devastated it. Russian principalities were reduced to ashes. Kiev, the spiritual heart of Slavic civilization, lay in ruins, and for the subsequent 240 years, Russian princes knelt before the Khans of the Golden Horde. This was more than a military occupation. It was absolute control, economic, political, and psychological. Annually, Russian princes were compelled to deliver tribute to Sarai, the Golden Horde's capital. They had to seek permission to govern their own lands, and at the whim of the Khan, Mongol horsemen would appear, pillaging, plundering, and enslaving people. By the 15th century, however, the Golden Horde began to unravel. Internal conflicts and waning power led to the emergence of 3 new khanates from its remnants, the Crimean, Astrakhan, and Kazan khanates. Among these, Kazan posed the most significant threat to Moscow. Why? Its geographical position. Kazan was situated directly on the Volga River, a vital trade and military artery. From their fortress on a high hill, the people of Kazan controlled all movement between Moscow and the east. Crucially, Kazan also preserved the Mongol military tradition. Its Tatar cavalry remained the most formidable warriors on the steppe. From its establishment in 1438 until 1552, Russian forces attempted to conquer Kazan at least 10 times, failing on every occasion. Attacks typically followed a consistent pattern. Russian troops would arrive, besiege the city, shell it for several weeks, and then retreat due to logistical issues or because Tatar cavalry assaulted their supply trains. Kazan seemed unassailable. However, in 1547, a 17-year-old decided this had to change. His name was Ivan Vasilievich, but history would remember him by another, more imposing title, Ivan the Terrible. Ivan IV was unlike previous princes. He became a grand prince at 3 years old, following his father's sudden death, and subsequent events forged the future czar's character. Instead of being enveloped in care and education, young Ivan observed boyar families vying for control around the throne. They neglected and even ridiculed him, simultaneously living in luxury at the state's expense. Ivan grew up in fear and solitude, yet also with an ironclad resolve. He vowed that Russia would never again suffer such a state. He would make Russia mighty, ending its dependence on anyone. And the greatest impediment to this ambition was Kazan. In 1547, at only 16, Ivan undertook something unprecedented. He proclaimed himself czar, derived from Caesar, emperor of all Rus, rather than merely a grand prince. This was a bold assertion of absolute power. Immediately, Ivan turned his attention to Kazan. Yet he understood that traditional approaches wouldn't suffice. Russian forces had failed 10 times. A radically new strategy was required. Ivan's military campaigns in 1547 and 1549 to 1550 met with failure. But unlike his predecessors, Ivan did not surrender. Instead, he learned. He realized the issue wasn't the bravery of his soldiers. It lay in logistics and technology. To conquer Kazan, Ivan needed 3 crucial elements: an advanced base near the target, modern siege weaponry, and a professional army. Consequently, Ivan began preparing for a battle that would fundamentally alter history. In 1551, an extraordinary event occurred on the Volga. Thousands of numbered logs floated down the river from Uglitch. These were not ordinary timbers. They were components of a prefabricated fortress. Military engineer Ivan Vorotkov designed an entire wooden stronghold, dismantled it, numbered every single piece, and transported it 900 kilometers downstream. Upon reaching its destination, just 18 miles from Kazan, Russian forces assembled it in a matter of weeks. They named it Sviazk. This was more than an engineering marvel. It was a stroke of strategic genius. For the first time, Russia possessed a strong base near Kazan, a place to store provisions and weapons, serving as a launching pad for assaults. The concern of lengthy supply lines was finally eliminated, but Ivan did not stop there. Recognizing that traditional Russian forces, largely composed of feudal cavalry where each nobleman brought his own contingent, were inadequate due to their lack of discipline and synchronized training, Ivan conceived an entirely novel military unit, the Streltsy. This marked Russia's inaugural professional standing army of musketeers. These were paid soldiers who underwent specialized training and, crucially, pledged allegiance directly to the czar, not to the aristocracy. They were equipped with arquebuses, the era's most advanced firearm technology. Furthermore, artillery played a significant role. Ivan invited European specialists, particularly from Italy and Germany, experts in contemporary siege warfare, to bolster his forces. He amassed 150 cannons, which, by the standards of the time, represented an immense artillery presence. However, the truly decisive weapon was orchestrated by a man named Butler, presumed to be an English engineer, whom the Russians dubbed Rosmysl, meaning the Wise One. He was a master of a new technique involving tunneling and using gunpowder to breach fortifications. By June of 1552, all preparations were finalized. Ivan, having learned from past failures, now commanded not just a large army, but a more sophisticated one, boasting superior technology and a meticulously planned strategy. On June 16, 1552, the 22-year-old Ivan IV led 150,000 warriors towards Kazan. This was his 11th attempt to capture the city, but this time, the outcome was destined to be different. When Russian troops appeared before the walls of Kazan on August 22, 1552, the Tatar defenders remained undaunted. They had repelled the Russians 10 times previously. Why would this time be any different? Kazan stood atop a formidable hill, fortified by thick wooden walls and a deep moat. Inside, the city held several months' worth of provisions, a concealed subterranean water source, and 10,000 Tatar warriors renowned as possessing the finest cavalry worldwide. Khan Yedegar Muhammad even sent a defiant message to Ivan. "Everything is prepared for you here. We invite you to a feast." Yet what transpired next astonished them. Instead of a direct assault, the Russian forces began digging trenches. They excavated zigzagging trenches, steadily advancing closer to the city. This particular tactic, known as sapping, originated in Europe but was an unseen strategy on the Russian steppes. Simultaneously, Ivan Vorotkov was constructing an unprecedented structure in Russia, the Battery Tower. This was no ordinary wooden siege tower, but a 12-meter-tall, multi-tiered engineering marvel, specifically designed to house artillery. Its uppermost platform could accommodate 10 heavy cannons, while the lower levels held 50 lighter ones. The objective was concentrated firepower, 60 cannons targeting the same section of the wall. This was the precursor to modern artillery fortifications and was truly revolutionary. A significant challenge arose. Kazan also possessed cannons. If they managed to destroy the tower during its construction, all effort would be in vain. Consequently, construction proceeded under the cover of night, shielded by temporary walls. Meanwhile, Russian artillery had a singular mission: to silence Kazan's guns. By August 29th, after a week of relentless bombardment, they succeeded. Kazan's heavy guns fell silent. The tower could now be moved into position. However, just as everything seemed to be progressing smoothly, nature intervened. Dreadful storms erupted. Torrential rain transformed the Russian camp into a muddy quagmire. Tents were ripped away by the wind and morale plummeted.
Some Russian soldiers believed it to be sorcery, attributing the foul weather to Tatar shamans. Even historical chronicles mention Kazan magicians appearing atop the walls each morning, performing strange rituals. In response, Ivan presented a crucifix believed to contain a fragment of the true cross from Jerusalem. Priests blessed the camp, and whether by chance or divine intervention, the weather cleared. Underground, another struggle unfolded. Miners silently dug tunnels beneath the walls. Their initial target was Kazan's subterranean water source. The city boasted a concealed underground water system, enabling it to withstand prolonged sieges, but Rasmussen, the English engineer, had located it. On August 30th, an explosion rocked the ground.
The water supply was obliterated. Now, every drop of water in Kazan had to be meticulously rationed. The battery tower was moved into place, and from its 12-meter height, 60 cannons began an incessant barrage on the same section of the wall. Within the city, conditions grew desperate. Water was scarce, food supplies dwindled, and with each passing day, the walls crumbled further. Khan Yadigar continued to refuse surrender. When Ivan even sent Tatar captives back with peace proposals, the defenders on the walls shot their compatriots, preferring a swift death for them over slow torture. Yet, Ivan had not yet deployed his ultimate weapon. Beneath the earth, miners had constructed intricate tunnels directly beneath the main walls. At key junctures, they created large chambers and filled them with gunpowder, tons of it. By September 30th, everything was ready. A series of fuses were connected, forming an elaborate network. The strategy was to trigger a series of successive detonations, which would demolish the foundations of the walls at several points. On the morning of October 2nd, 1552, the command was given. The initial explosion resonated like thunder, obliterating a significant segment of the wall near the Arsk gates. Another explosion followed near the Nogai gates, with a third one coming immediately after. Once the smoke dissipated, 3 vast breaches gaped within Kazan's walls, and the 50,000-strong Russian army advanced. What ensued was one of the most intense urban battles of the 15th century. Russian forces surged through the openings like an encroaching flood. Yet, Kazan's defenders did not yield, fighting for every street, every building, and every alleyway. This represented a desperate final stand by a culture anticipating its demise. The Tatar cavalry, formidable warriors of the open steppes, found themselves trapped in the cramped city streets. Unable to utilize their speed and maneuverability, they nonetheless continued their resistance. Civilians, men, women, and even children, seized whatever they could find and joined the fray, hurling stones from rooftops and pouring boiling oil from windows. They understood that the city's fall would signify the end of their known world, and they were proven right. The Streltsy, Ivan's trained musketeers, advanced block by block with remarkable discipline, firing upon defenders from a distance where traditional Tatar close combat skills were less effective. In Kazan's main mosque, the religious leader Kol Sharif, alongside his students, made a final stand. They transformed the madrasa, an Islamic school, into a temporary stronghold and fought to the last. Kol Sharif ultimately fell while defending his sacred library. By noon on October 2nd, Khan Yadigar Muhammad had been captured. Soon thereafter, the leading Nogai military commanders surrendered. Some survivors attempted to escape into the northern forests, but were hunted down and killed. Others retreated to the inner citadel, but hope was gone. By sunset, Kazan had fallen. What followed was brutal. Even by 15th century standards, a mass slaughter occurred. Most Tatar structures were razed and mosques were torched. Despite the devastation, there were moments of humanity. Between 60,000 and 100,000 Russian captives and slaves, seized in raids over many years, were liberated. Many had been in bondage for decades, with some having forgotten how to speak Russian. Ivan did not participate in the street fighting. Historical accounts suggest he remained in his tent, praying throughout the battle. Some historians view this as wisdom, arguing that a czar should not risk his life in chaotic combat. Others believe Ivan was simply frightened. However, Ivan's location was less significant than his accomplishment. After a 42-day siege, after 114 years of existence, after centuries as the hub of Mongol Tatar power on the Volga, Kazan had fallen. On October 4th, Ivan entered the conquered city. He decreed the construction of an Orthodox church on the site of the main mosque and commanded that a new symbol, a cross surmounting an Islamic crescent, be placed on Russian churches. The message was unmistakable. The last Mongol Empire had been vanquished. Yet, history did not end there. In fact, it had merely begun, because the fall of Kazan was not just a military triumph. It marked a pivotal moment in global history, one of those instances where, it can be said, the world became different both before and after the event. Allow me to elaborate. The victory at Kazan demonstrated something crucial. European military technology, cannons, siege engineering, professional armies, outperformed traditional steppe warfare.
For centuries, the Mongol Tatar cavalry had dominated battlefields with speed, maneuverability, and horse archery tactics. However, against fortified walls, against cannons, against firearms, this advantage vanished. This is why other khanates quickly collapsed after Kazan. In 1556, Astrakhan was conquered. A few decades later, Siberia, the last khanate, also fell. The era of steppe empires had concluded. With the incorporation of Kazan and then Astrakhan under Russian control, the entire Volga River, from source to mouth, became Russian. This vital Eastern European trade route was now controlled by Moscow. This opened up trade with Persia via the Caspian Sea, pathways into Central Asia, and, most importantly, access to Siberia. Just 3 decades after Kazan's fall, Russian fur hunters began crossing the Urals. By 1639, less than a century after Kazan, Russians had reached the Pacific Ocean.
They had traversed the entire Eurasian continent in a time frame that other European nations took to explore a single coastline. This is why Russia today is the largest country in the world by land area. It all commenced with the conquest of Kazan. Perhaps the most profound consequence, however, was the shift in self-perception. For 300 years, Russia had been under the dominance of Mongol Tatar Muslim power. The Grand Princes of Moscow were compelled to humble themselves before the Khan. They paid tribute. They sought permission. The capture of Kazan fundamentally reversed this dynamic. For the first time, Moscow was no longer subservient. For the first time, Russians were the conquerors. And for the first time, the Russian state became a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire. Kazan brought under its dominion dozens of peoples: Tatars, Chuvash, Mari, Udmurts, and Bashkirs. Some were Muslim, others followed ancient ancestral religions. Now all lived under Moscow's rule. This is why some scholars consider October 2nd, 1552, the genesis of the multicultural Russian Empire we recognize today. However, a somber aspect shadowed this event. The Muslim inhabitants of Kazan were expelled from the city, mosques were demolished, and a campaign of forced Christianization began, though it wasn't entirely successful. For the Tatars, this was no grand triumph of civilization over barbarism. It signified the end of their independent state, marking the beginning of centuries under foreign dominion. Even now, on October 15th, or October 2nd by the old calendar, some Tatars in Tatarstan observe a day of remembrance and sorrow, commemorating those who died defending Kazan. Russian authorities prohibited public gatherings on this day in 2021, yet the memory persists. History, as always, is multifaceted. One's victory often translates to another's tragedy. Ivan returned to Moscow amidst a blaze of glory. News of his wife giving birth to a son amplified his joy. Though the infant's life was brief, the Tsar was hailed as a hero. To immortalize his victory, Ivan commissioned the construction of one of Russia's most iconic buildings, St. Basil's Cathedral in Red Square, Moscow. With its vibrant, unconventional domes, the cathedral embodied a fusion of Russian architecture and Eastern elements, serving as a physical emblem of the nascent multicultural empire Russia was becoming. Nevertheless, Ivan's story did not conclude happily. In the years following the capture of Kazan, Ivan grew increasingly cruel and psychologically unstable. He established the Oprichnina, a secret police force that terrorized the entire country. Thousands perished at his hands during fits of paranoid rage. And in a burst of anger in 1581,
he personally killed his eldest son with a staff. This is precisely why we refer to him as the Terrible, not just for his power, but also for his brutality. But that is a matter for another tale. Today, however, we must concentrate on the lessons learned. So, after all we've discussed, what lessons can be drawn? I believe there are three. For centuries, military dominance belonged to those with the swiftest cavalry and the finest archers. The Mongols forged the greatest empire in history by leveraging these advantages. But as technology shifted, with the advent of cannons, firearms, and modern siegecraft, the entire situation transformed. What once seemed invincible suddenly became vulnerable. This principle applies beyond warfare. It extends to business, technology, and life itself. What succeeded yesterday might fail tomorrow. The capacity to adapt, learn, and implement new ideas determines survival. Ivan wasn't the greatest military commander, but he was willing to learn from his mistakes, embrace new technologies, and modify his tactics. This is precisely why he triumphed where others faltered. Legends speak of valiant warriors and glorious battles. In reality, though, most conflicts are decided by mundane factors such as logistics, supply lines, and preparation. Ivan prevailed at Kazan not merely because he commanded a superior force. He won because he constructed Sviazk, a forward operating base that resolved supply issues. He won because he spent months preparing, training soldiers, stockpiling weapons, and meticulously planning every detail. The same holds true in life. Success typically springs not from grand moments, but from meticulous preparation, diligent effort, and sustained perseverance over time. For Moscow, the fall of Kazan was a beginning, the initial stride toward becoming a great power. For the Tatars, it was an end, the loss of independence and the advent of centuries under a foreign yoke. History is not a simple tale of good versus evil. It is intricate. Every significant event produces winners and losers, those who celebrate and those who mourn. It's crucial to remember this when we study history. We shouldn't merely extol the victors. We must also remember those who lost, the cultures that vanished, the voices that were silenced. Because true history isn't about kingdoms and empires, it's about people. People who lived, loved, hoped, and struggled during pivotal moments. On October 2nd, 1552, on a hill overlooking the Volga, a city fell, and with it, the final vestige of the Mongol Empire in Europe concluded. Yet from those ashes arose an entirely new Russia, a multinational empire that would stretch from Poland to the Pacific, from the Arctic to Central Asia. The story of Kazan reminds us that history is forged in momentous turning points, when leaders confront difficult choices, when technology alters the rules of engagement, and when old empires yield to new ones. These pivotal junctures, however, always carry a considerable cost. Every triumph conceals a heartbreak, every fresh start an ending. Now, I'd like to ask you, what aspect of this narrative resonated with you the most? Was it Ivan's inventive engineering solution, the valor demonstrated by Kazan's defenders, or the enduring repercussions that molded the world we inhabit today? Please share your reflections in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribing, and activating the notification bell to ensure you don't miss out on upcoming in-depth historical explorations. Because history transcends mere events of the past. It offers critical insights into our present circumstances and potentially our future trajectory. Thank you for tuning in, and always remember, every great empire originates from a specific decision, a choice, a fleeting moment of courage or desperation that alters everything. See you in the next installment.